Hello, Product Con. My name is Giff Constable. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm sorry we can't be there in person all together, but I hope you're having a great conference. For this session, we're going to be talking about road mapping. And I'll explain what I mean by first principles in just a second. But let me start just by setting the context of the last really big roadmap that I had to do. So I joined Meetup as the chief product officer about a little over a year after they'd been acquired by WeWork. And a little bit before I came on board, they brought in a new CEO, and the CEO they hadn't had some dedicated product leadership in some time, and so they brought me on. And in the 4 months before I got there, the new CEO and the team had done a lot of work to put together a new strategy document. This document laid out a vision for where they would go, the why, sort of what was going to change, what wasn't going to change, and laid out some very big numeric goals in terms of engagement, user growth, international growth, financial growth, and the like. And as everyone knows, when it comes to WeWork, outsized goals were the name of the game. What the document was missing was a path from today to that future. It didn't explain how we were going to hit those big goals. And that fell down to me as the head of product and my team. And Meetup was a place where to hit numbers, it really took product and engineering. It's not like some other companies where you can drive metrics through sales and marketing. Everything that happens really happens through the product and engineering side. So it was on us to create this map. And it was a classic roadmap exercise coming out of nothing. There had been no roadmap when I got there. Now, I bet that most of you out there in the audience are active or aspiring product leaders, product managers, which means that roadmaps are a core part of your life. It's a key part of our job, is to sort of lay out what's coming and why. And in this talk, I want to get into some key questions you need to ask yourself, because roadmaps can be great opportunities, but they also are tricky waters. There's lots of danger points on roadmaps to slip on a banana peel, to make a mistake. And I'm hoping that some of the questions that I pose today help you avoid those mistakes and make your roadmaps stronger and sharper. Now, a little bit more about me, just so you understand the full context. I just mentioned that I ran product and engineering at Meetup until earlier this year. I ran product engineering at another fintech marketplace that was VC-backed called Axial, and I was CEO of Neo, which was a 100-person product innovation shop that was scattered around the world. And I've done several startups, I've sold some companies, and I've written several books. Some of you might know my nonfiction books, Talking with Humans and Testing with Humans. They both try to answer this question: how do we know if a new idea is a good idea? It could be a feature. Is it a good idea as a feature? It could be a startup. But one book asks the question, how do you figure that out? How do you test if it's a good idea? Through qualitative means, through talking to your customers and market. The other one through running structured experiments. And then I've done some fun things as well. And most recently, I published a science fiction novel called Becoming Monday. And if you are interested in where artificial intelligence is going and like sci-fi, I hope you give Becoming Monday a shot. I'm working on a new book right now, and it's called First Principles Product Management. And this book, instead of being a thick book of advice, is really a workbook of questions. And it came out of a theory that I have about product management, that it looks a bit like this. That product management is this incredibly, almost insanely multidisciplinary role where we have to synthesize so many different parts of the business. We're dealing with lots of different pressures. We're dealing with different processes, different cultures, politics, you name it. And it's the kind of thing where you should and can steal best practices from other people. But if you copy someone else's playbook, you will get yourself into trouble because every context is different. And so instead of giving people answers, what I wanted to do was give people questions, because I really believe that a good product manager, if they ask the right questions, if they remember to ask the right questions, can get to good answers and good decisions. And that's what I'm going to do in this talk. I'm not going to give you so many answers as hopefully I give you some thought-provoking prompts in the form of questions. So here, we're going to dive in. And in particular, as we get onto road mapping, I am hoping to touch upon something here where I want you to think about, if for your next roadmap exercise, what is going to be your biggest challenge? What is the biggest potential gotcha moment? What could be the banana peel that slips you up as you're trying to do your next roadmap? And think about something that other than just, oh, I built the wrong thing. Product managers, we have a tendency to obsess about what are we going to build, but roadmaps, as I'm about to get into, have a lot more to them than that. So take a second and think about this question. What's going to be the trickiest part of your next road mapping exercise? It could be one thing, could be three. Go ahead and write it down. You could write it down for yourself. You could put it in the comments. I'll give you a second. All right, in the interest of charging forward, we're going to dive into 10 questions. They're going to start at the strategic level, get into communication, and then end on a very personal note. So we're going to start with the first of 10 questions that hopefully are thought-provoking and get you thinking about how your next roadmap exercise can be better, and hopefully touch upon one of the challenges you might have just written down. So the first one is this. It's understanding the context with which you're playing in terms of the mode or the gear the company is in. And this is as relevant for a CPO thinking about a portfolio of teams or a product manager working on a specific team. The question is, what's the mode your company is in? And there's 5 big ones. You're trying to scale really fast, or your growth has slowed and you're trying to unlock that stalled growth again, or you're defending against disruption or new market entrants, or it's worse than stalled growth. You actually have to transform or reinvent your business. And then lastly, sometimes growth is stalled, but cash flows are still really good, and you're just trying to maintain the good thing while you can. It's really important that you know whether you're that rocket ship on the left or you're that castle under siege on the right, but also that you're aligned with the board and the CEO as to what gear you're in. If you're on different pages, that could set you up to be in a tricky spot. You want to make sure your team also understands the context with which you're in. This can be an interesting point of debate, and sometimes leadership can delude themselves as to where they are. I remember when I joined Axial, the company had just come off of a really good run of growth, and it had stalled. And at first they thought to themselves, all right, well, we just need to polish up the product, sharpen that up. Let's get some new leadership in for that, and let's also do the same thing for sales and marketing. We get those 2 engines working, everything's going to be fine. But when you looked at the data and you actually spoke to customers, you could see there were much deeper problems. That the actual business model, the way the company was trying to make money, was tossing huge amounts of friction into the marketplace. It was a negative flywheel. And that the company had to rethink what it was at a far deeper level before it was ready to grow again. And it was acknowledging that problem that allowed them to start solving it and getting on a path to saving the company and moving forward again. Now, ultimately, you need to align with where your CEO is. You can have a healthy debate about it, but if they think you're in one place and you think you're another, you've got to still disagree and commit and be aligned there. Number 2 is, what's the force ranked order of your various and possibly competing goals and different priorities? This is a phenomenal exercise to do to get people in a room and actually make everyone force rank things. You need this for focus, of course. And the exercise for force ranking, you could write out in different priorities on index cards and have people force rank them, stack rank them, or you could do it in a conversation, it doesn't matter. At Meetup, we had a team called the notifications team. And the notifications team was in charge of the emails that get sent out and the push notifications that go through the mobile application. Now, anyone who has used Meetup knows that we send a lot of email. That might have caused you to wince. It might have caused you to chuckle. It's not something that the company's proud of. But the company's also in a bit of a bind because every time it's tried to lower that number, some of the marketplace engagement numbers go down. People join fewer groups, they go to fewer events, which is the whole reason why people are part of the marketplace in the first place. So, company was in a bind, not loving the customer experience it was creating. And we started a team to basically ask this question: how can we apply machine learning, artificial intelligence techniques to send fewer messages, fewer notifications, but better so that our metrics are at least as good, if not better, but it's a better customer experience. So that was the original mission. But the team was also feeling pressure from the CEO to boost our metrics. As if we had a very revenue-oriented CEO, he wanted these numbers to be going up. And then lastly, they were feeling pressure from the engineers because the team was dealing with several old, very brittle, poorly tested tech stacks that made it quite hard to iterate, to evolve, to make changes without things breaking. At first, they tried to create a portfolio approach, and that can be a useful thing when you're working at the CPO level with multiple teams. Taking a portfolio approach can be smart. But at a team level, if you stretch yourself too thin, you just won't be able to execute. And that's what was happening, is that they just weren't getting enough done on any one of these things to feel successful. So the product manager grabbed me, grabbed the CEO, grabbed the team. We got into a room and we had to say no to some things and say yes to some things, because that's good strategy. Good strategy helps you say no to things so that you can focus and execute on the things you need to do. The next question, which sort of veers from strategy into execution, is the mode that your team is in. You need to be very aware of this question, and your team and your executives or stakeholders or whatever you want to call them need to be aware of this as well. There's three big ones here. There's you're trying to hit a numeric goal, get that to go up 30%, get that number to drop by 10%. Or you're trying to discover a path forward. How do we open up a new customer market base? How can we create a new revenue stream? Or you're trying to deliver a very specific feature, often by a very specific time. Now, any of these three things can be valid. It all depends on the context with which the company is playing, right? For that third, product managers often don't like it, but you could have a customer contract that's really important or a big conference that you need to be ready for, right? Those are all valid. The key thing is that you know which one you are, because if you're aiming at the wrong target, and other people, if you're aiming at a target and other people in your team think they're aiming at a different target, or your executives think you're aiming at a different target, you could be in for a world of hurt because people's expectations and perceptions are all askew, right? If you're trying to discover a path forward and your engineer thinks you're trying to ship something, or vice versa, then you're really not going to be aligned and not going to be executing very effectively. Same thing goes if your executive thinks that you're going to be shipping that feature by that date and you're in exploration land, that executive is going to be quite upset. So the key thing is to make sure that everyone is aware, that you ask this question in public, and that you get alignment with all the key people that are involved. Because your execution path really is going to be different across this. One last point on this, right? If you're trying to hit a numeric goal, well, you're going to be running experiments, hopefully, a quarter to a third of your time could be on experiments. The rest is going to be on shipping features. You have to move that number. But if you're on B, if you're discovering a path forward, you do not want to be focused on product and shipping. That's actually a big mistake people make in this mode. You want to be doing a lot of qualitative research and you want to be running lots of experiments. Learning, that's the name of the game there. And then lastly, for C, delivering a specific feature, execution, focus, minimizing scope creep, making sure everyone's aligned to hit the goal, right? All right, I'm going to shift slightly into the communication side from this strategy and team execution side. Because product managers tend to obsess, I'm making a generalization, but tend to obsess about what are we going to build? What are we going to build? But you have to think about the roadmap process as a product as well, so that it runs smoothly and you're creating an opportunity for you and your team to be successful. So here's this first question. Who should be involved in creating the roadmap with me, right? It takes a village to build a roadmap, to build a product. Everyone is invested in what you are doing. Everyone cares about what you're doing. What you're doing affects the customer, it affects the financials, it affects everything, right? Now, not everyone necessarily insists on getting a say, but you need to know who and how you involve them. So how do you involve your team? Who on your team? Hopefully everybody, but who on your team should be involved? Who else within the product and engineering and design organization? And then who else across the rest of the company? Now, this is an area where I stubbed my toe, made a totally unnecessary faux pas when I first joined Meetup. As I mentioned before, there was no roadmap when I got there. The teams were all working on fairly high probability of success projects, but all of those projects were going to be incremental in terms of lift. And here we were with a strategy document with these big goals. So there was a huge discrepancy, right? These little wins were never going to help us get to those big goals, even if they had a pretty good hit rate. So something needed to change. But the only way to sort of reorient an organization onto some bigger swings is you needed a roadmap, you need to explain the why and the what. And so we were in a real hurry to get a roadmap in place. So I grabbed our head of design, Farah, a very smart woman who really understood our customer. And we took over a corner of one of our floors and we started just working in public. We were working on the walls, and I would reach out to people in different teams, grab someone from the customer support team, grab someone from data science and machine learning, grab someone from marketing. You get the picture. And I'd pull them in and we'd expose our ideas and we would have a great back and forth. What I didn't realize was I was actually triggering a cultural sensitivity that, fair or not, there was a perception that previous leadership had favorites, that there were people on the in and people on the out. And by selecting certain people, where I thought I was getting group representation, let's make sure that customer support has a voice, what was happening was that individuals who weren't getting tapped were getting upset and they were getting offended. And they didn't say this to me, they said this to other people. It did bubble up to me. And so it all worked itself out. It wasn't ultimately a problem. I think people realized that I did like working transparently and collaboratively, but I hadn't checked about the sensitivity. I hadn't thought explicitly enough as to who should be involved and why. And so I tripped over myself in a needless way. Now, when you ask this question, you have to ask the next question, which is how do you involve them, right? You can't get bogged down in a billion conversations, but you need to think about how you can involve these different people and different teams in such a way that they feel respected and heard, but that you can keep your process moving forward effectively. Respected and heard, those are the key words there. People don't necessarily need to get their way as long as they feel respected and heard. So when you're thinking about your roadmap process as a product, and you're designing this, right? Design how you interact with people. A few clues about what we did during this Meetup roadmap, notwithstanding the faux pas I just mentioned. As I said, we pulled people in individually. And then what we started to do was open office hours so that if anyone wanted to engage, they could. And we started doing road shows where we took our ideas out to different teams. This culminated in some documents that were shared with different teams and then rolled up into the next thing that I'm going to talk about, which is what's the best form factor for your roadmap to get the ideas across within the time and budget that you have. And do you need to customize this for different stages in time and different audiences, right? Now, the roadmap I was working on did culminate in a big presentation to the company. And we had pictures and did some storytelling and really tried to sort of help people understand the why and get them excited about the what as well. Leading up to that, however, we had, as I said, we created all these different meetings and office hours and road shows. During those, we would sort of sketch out what we were thinking, but we really tried to listen as much as possible. Not get defensive when people challenged us, but really take in their perspectives. That culminated in a document. So at the very beginning, I asked the new CEO, my new boss, how he liked to receive and sort of absorb a roadmap. Is it slides? Is it something more visual? Is it a document? And he said he liked to read. I've seen roadmaps get done really well through video. It takes time, it takes budget to do it. For high vision concepts, video can be amazing. I've seen comic books that are really good. In our case, we created a document. And there were major sections in the beginning of the document, sort of laid out the why, and then it went into the what, and some of those details around how, although we tried not to get too specific around the how, because we wanted to leave that to the teams to actually execute. Now, rather than sharing this early document out to the entire company, where you'd have a pile on of groupthink and lots of people redlining, which I really wanted to avoid, I cloned different versions of this early draft, and I gave a different cloned copy to different teams. So the customer support team got one, the marketing team got one, finance and legal got one, and they could comment and redline at the team level to try to minimize groupthink. And Farah and I were paying attention to those comments and we're responding to them, asking follow-on questions, again, not getting defensive, but making sure people know we were listening and we were hearing them. This ultimately got synthesized into a larger document that was a more final one that got shared out with the entire company. And even then we were looking for feedback. At the end of every section, there was a link to a Google form where people could write down a question or write down a comment. And then ultimately it turned into this presentation. So if I'm getting anything across, I hope I'm helping you understand that you want to be designing your roadmap process like a product, not just obsessing solely about what you're going to build. The next key part about roadmap gets into the content. And again, people tend to think a lot about what am I going to build? I can't tell you that. That's so context specific to where your company is and what you're all trying to do. But here's a key thing that product managers need to always remember. And another area where I stub my toe, even though after all these years, I should know better. It's this question: have I clearly linked the work to a focused, measurable business goal? Now, when us product people are sharing ideas with each other, a lot of times this sort of gets, it's in shorthand, it's sort of understood and oftentimes unsaid. We get that everything we're trying to do is connected to impact, otherwise we wouldn't bother to do it. We're not just creating features for the sake of creating features, or God, you hope not. But the rest of the organization doesn't understand that shorthand. They don't talk in the same language that we do, and they need to understand. We need to connect the dots to bridge the two worlds between the product world that we think about and the impact and business world that they do. Now, this could be in the form of financial metrics, but not always, right? It could be that you're trying to reduce a certain number of events. It could be that you're trying to increase a certain number of people on a new platform. It could be market share related. It doesn't have to be revenue and EBITDA, right? But it needs to be something that is strategic and measurable for the business. One thing that I'll say is I've often gotten into a situation where this feels particularly hard because the true impact is a ways away, where you have to do a step 1 and then a step 2 and then finally a step 3 to actually get the metric results that you want. And I don't have time to go into a deep story here, but hopefully as I'm saying this, it's resonating that you've had experiences like that too, where the first thing you need to do is a foundational piece. Without that foundational piece, you'll never get the return. But the foundational piece itself doesn't give you the return. So it's hard to do, and it can often feel like bullshit to product managers because you get into fantasy land around these forecasts, but you've really got to reach into the future. You've got to reach to the future and say, all right, if we do lay this foundation, you could admit that the metrics aren't going to move here, but then we're going to do the second step, and that's where the metrics are going to move, and here's how, and here's why. Connect those dots, right? People won't connect those dots on their own. Product people might, but business people and other colleagues will not. So do explicitly connect those dots. Which then leads me to the next question, which is also about connecting dots. How can you use the opportunity to educate and align the company, your leaders, your peers? Now, here's what happens at most companies, is that people have been on the company for a while. They haven't used the product themselves in some time, or they haven't spoken to a customer in some time. Some people have never even used the product and get positions of incredible influence inside a company. And then you can have groups such as customer support where they're talking to customers every single day, but within a particular silo. And they've got a particular context, which is different from other teams. And so you have an opportunity when you do your roadmap to help people see the big picture. You don't want to assume when you're laying out, here's what we're going to build and by when, which is what everyone wants to know, right? That's what everyone's demanding. You don't want to assume that they're going to understand why. Again, other designers, other product people, they probably can get it just by seeing the choices you've made. But non-product people won't. They don't swim in these waters. They don't talk in this language. So you have this opportunity to ground everyone in the customer, in the value the customer is trying to achieve, in the value you're trying to bring to the business. Use this opportunity to focus and reorient people on these key elements of the customer, of value, of the why. Don't assume that they will know why you're making decisions, but tell them explicitly. And it will allow greater alignment, which will then allow your project to be more successful. Number 9 shifts gears into craft. And I had to ask this question because I see this get forgotten or ignored, or maybe those are the wrong words, just not given enough time in enough organizations, and it's heartbreaking. And it's heartbreaking probably for you if you're facing this, as well as designers and engineers on your team, which is that not enough time gets made for this list. Quality and usability testing, paying down technical debt, internationalization, instrumentation, getting your A/B testing infrastructure in place, getting your metrics and measurement in place, iterating after release. My good friend Jeff Gottheld used to make a joke that like the biggest fantasy in product is version 1.1. And it's because companies launch a feature, they take all these shortcuts to launch the feature and they jump to the next one and they jump to the next one. That's not how good products get made. You need to get something in the market, learn, and iterate. And what I didn't put in the primary list, but I hope there's time for as well, is experiments, because experiments help you increase the odds that your ideas will be successful. This stuff is a key part of our craft. It should be non-negotiable. Unfortunately, that's often not the case. But what I would push you to do is really ask yourself this question and figure out how can you bake time for this stuff into the roadmap. Just bake it in there. It's there, right? It's not something you have to ask permission for. Just put it in there. Now you can work with your team to decide how much and for which ones of these things. But I guarantee if you're ignoring these things, the team, is feeling strife and anxiety. Designers are upset because you shipped something that didn't have enough delight and now you can't iterate it. And the engineers are upset because you didn't have enough testing infrastructure. And now when something breaks, it's really hard to fix it. And the data science team is upset because you don't understand why the metrics just moved because there was no A/B testing infrastructure to help us piece apart what just happened and why, right? So try to make these things non-negotiable as much as you can. All right, and the last, number 10, to bring this home, gets personal. This is a question to ask for you in your career. What is my boss or their boss suspicious I might be weak on? And how can I use this roadmap as an opportunity to bolster their confidence? Don't let this question get you defensive. We all have strengths and weaknesses. I have tons of them, and tons of weaknesses, let me put it that way. And a good boss is looking at an employee and trying to understand the strengths and weaknesses. And you're trying to understand weaknesses for 2 reasons. One, so you can figure out how to help them grow and how to align them with projects where they'll be successful while growing. But the other is you're trying to figure out how much you can trust someone and how much weight you can put on someone so that you're not setting them up for failure. It's something that you're always doing. It's just basic human nature. So they're going to be asking questions and watching for, are you growing and where are you weak and where are you strong? And don't let that put you off. That's just how it works, in my opinion. But you have an opportunity to ask this question and use the roadmap, because the roadmap touches on so many things: strategy, product design, communication, collaboration, all these different things that product management requires. The roadmap is an opportunity to shine in all of these different things. So explicitly try to figure out where might they think you need some help. Maybe it's your strategic thinking. Maybe it's in financial forecasting and modeling. And use this roadmap as an opportunity to really shine, to really grow. Okay? So I had a funny situation with my previous, the CEO at Meetup that I was talking about, where when I created that first roadmap, and this ties back to the question about business metrics I mentioned, that I had not explicitly asked that question, and I hadn't asked it in the context of this one, where the CEO, my new boss, had had some bad experiences previously with product leaders where he didn't believe they were financially focused enough, that these product leaders were all interested in features and defending the customer and making things look pretty and seem delightful, but what about revenue? What about the bottom line? What about growth? And when he went looking for a new product leader, he really wanted to find someone who cared about the business. And he thought that he had found that in me, but I think because of his experiences, he was keeping an eye on that. He was a little bit worried. We were getting to know each other. So what happened when I shared my very first draft with him, so I had asked him this question. I had said to him, do you like getting things raw and early, or do you like things a little more polished? And he said he liked things raw and early. Great. I like sharing. I love rough draft culture. I like sharing things early because the sooner you can catch misalignment and find out whether you are aligned, the better. Unfortunately, I shared it a bit too early. So we're creating this roadmap and we're in the real sort of initial sketch stage of some big swings. And I just wanted him to know roughly where our heads were at. So I sent over this outline, not even at the document stage I described before. We sent over this outline. And on a Friday night, he started looking at this and he puked all over it. He wrote these mean redline comments on this Google Doc I had shared and apologized for it later. We laughed about this. But what he was doing is he was reading about these sort of conceptual areas of investment and some big features that would help our customers. And he was wanting to know, where is revenue? How is this connected to revenue? How is this connected to a business metric? I hadn't connected the dots yet. I hadn't done it yet. I shared it a little bit too early. And the reason why it was a problem was because I wasn't aware of this question. I wasn't aware of what he was suspicious of or worried about, might be a better way of phrasing it, and trying to keep an eye on it, right? He was trying to sort of spot, okay, I hired this fella. Did I make a good hire? Is he going to make me happy in this area where I've been frustrated before? And as much as I love sharing things early, and he'd asked for something to be shared early, if I had asked this question explicitly and had a conversation with him about it, I would have avoided stubbing my toe. Again, it all worked out just fine, but it was a needless faux pas. So think about this one too. So here are the 10 questions. None of these are answers, and none of these are, what should we build? But I hope that these questions are thought-provoking. I hope these questions help your next roadmap process be more successful. If you want to get in contact with me, my Twitter is Giffco, my email is right there, my website is there. If you're interested in battle testing some of the questions and ideas in this new book, First Principles Product Management with me, please raise your hand, send me an email, or there's a post on my blog that will allow you to sign up for it. I would love to hear from you. I hope this has been a useful talk. I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you very much.